We're coming into the last poll closing of the night, coming up on 11 p.m. Eastern. In Washington state, residents there vote by mail. If you choose, so everybody gets sent a ballot so that you can return by mail. If you choose, instead of mailing in your ballot, you can take your ballot to a drop box or to a voting center. And if you do that, you have until 8 p.m. local time to do that. 8 p.m. local time is 5 seconds ago. So in Washington, there's a bunch of interesting races to watch. We're in terms of Democratic Party machinations, we've been watching the Democratic member of Congress, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. She's sort of an outspoken centrist, kind of an idiosyncratic, interesting Democratic member of Congress. She's facing primary challengers in her southwestern Washington state district. It's an R+2 district. Trump narrowly won that district in 2024. She's narrowly won that race twice. So we'll be watching that. Washington is also a state where we've got the top two candidates advancing to the general election, regardless of which party they are in. So we'll be having a look at those Washington results when we are first starting to get them. We are still very closely, though, watching the Senate race in Michigan as the Democratic primary in the Michigan Senate race continues to be a real nail biter. The polling in this race shifted over time. It sort of made people think that there was going to be a really big difference in the early vote as compared to the same day vote. But I think a lot of the prognostication on this one is falling by the wayside as we now just have to watch the actual vote come in. And what you see on the right side of your screen here is an interesting factor. We've got 42% of the vote here overall. You see how tight it is between Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens. But on the right side of your screen there, that is Mallory McMorrow, who was in this race until July 5th when she dropped out, but she is still on the ballot. And pulling 3.7% of the vote is no way to get yourself elected senator. But it is an interesting factor that may become really operative in terms of us understanding the dynamics of this race as they come in. Right now, the difference, she's got 22,861 votes. Mallory McMorrow, again, she's not still in the race. Look at the difference between Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens. It's 20,000 votes. So in a close race, every single vote can matter, and quirky dynamics in 2/3-way races can be potentially determinative.
Yeah, and your point on the polling, I mean, polling primaries is always difficult because you're modeling an electorate, and those modeling assumptions make a huge difference. The last 5 or 6 polls that we saw, like high-quality polls in this race, had Abdul El-Sayed up by double digits plus.
Yeah.
I think at this point in the evening, we can say pretty definitively that will not be the margin.
Yeah.
And I think that has actually a pretty important implication because whoever wins this is going to win a pretty close race between these two candidates. It's not going to be a romp. And that's going to have implications for how whoever it is wins kind of figures out how to stitch that coalition back together to take on Mike Rogers in the fall. And I do think it's different coming out of a narrow win than a big win in terms of what's going through your head about how much do I need to talk to the folks tonight at the podium, for instance, or tomorrow, if it's tomorrow, that didn't vote for me. And I think that's actually now very much in the air for either of these candidates.
I'm struck by you talking about the need for whoever wins this on the Democratic side to stitch that coalition together. And as we're speaking to folks at home, I'm speaking to some of those in the room on both sides, including inside the White House right now. And a Trump ally, I think you're getting our preview of what it's going to look like in the fall. Again, it doesn't matter what happens tonight. It matters what happens in November. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this Trump ally, someone who is close to the president, in his ear on nights like this, so there's a preview of what Twitter may look like tomorrow, mind you, saying that they are focused on exploiting, they will be focused on exploiting those differences, the divisions that we're witnessing as we speak and have been talking about right now among Democrats, obviously. So on the one hand, you have the Democrats who they only got a few months to try to, as you say, stitch it back together. At the same time, the Republicans, Trump land, will be looking to do everything they can to sort of amplify this.
It's not unlike the Republicans don't have something to exploit on their side, too. Mm-hmm. Republicans have delivered absolutely squat to the people of Michigan over the last 2 years, except high gas prices, a lack of access to health care, and a whole bunch of other decisions that Mike Rogers is going to have to carry into this general election.
And in electoral terms, they've delivered to the people of Michigan the same Senate candidate who lost the last Senate race in Michigan against Alyssa Slotkin.
Exactly. That's
Possibly
exactly
the same gubernatorial candidate who's lost twice statewide as well.
And so while that is their space, they're going to do exactly what Peter said. And so to shift the argument to say, look at all the commies on the left. And look at all the scary things you need to focus on the left.
You're right.
That's why I want to go back to something that Ali Vitale said that is very, very important, where she posited this framing of, this either or, do I turn out my base voters? Yeah, Simone and I can talk about turning out that base vote. Or do I turn out the folks who don't vote? Let me tell you what I did. I turned out both because politics is not a zero-sum game if you want to win. And the Democrats have to ask themselves, I don't give a damn who the nominee is at this point in the game. You got to zero in on the bottom line. Do you want to win this race? Because all the indicators, the leading indicators are there that you can.
Also, I want to say Mike Rogers in a kind of, resume way, makes sense as a sort of normie Republican in that state.
House Intelligence Committee.
Intelligence Committee, and a kind of, again, both, he's MAGA because everyone's MAGA now, but he wasn't really MAGA, so he has some sort of old Romney-style pedigree. He had an interview with Semaphore the other day, and they asked him, what his position were on the tariffs. He couldn't come up with it. About the Iran war, he said, I don't care. He goes, well, I care, but it's not really what I'm hearing about. It's man, you're going to, again, this goes in both directions. You're going to have to answer for the tariffs. You're going to have to answer for for Todd Blanche. You're going to have to answer for the war in Iran. You're going to have to answer for gas prices. You're going to have to answer for grocery prices. You better get a thing together. Now, you can rant about
scot-free right now on this because all of the money that's been spent thus far in the primary has been spent between the Democratic candidates. And so Mike Rogers just walking around here like Mr. Rogers in the neighborhood. I don't care. And
you should care.
He should care.
I think you should care.
To the point that Peter was making about the coming together, it is not easy to come together this close to the general election. It'll be less than 90 days. It's a late primary. In Texas, they still trying to come together in the Democratic primary. Tallarico is still struggling, too. You asked him the question about black voter support. He did a town hall the other day with black voters, trying to talk to them about their issues.
The thing he's working hardest on in his campaign.
And he will need to. So if El Sayed is the nominee, even if Haley Stevens is the nominee, I've talked to people in Michigan that have said, look, they both have terse support and they both have work to do in the black community. This looks like this primary is coming down to what voters in Wayne County, specifically voters in Detroit, specifically black voters, because Western Wayne County is white. So what are voters in Detroit going to do? What are they talking about? And that's what I'm looking for.
By the way, not for nothing, the biggest billboard we saw as we drove to Saginaw, 100 miles northwest of Detroit yesterday and back was the giant gas price signs everywhere. $4.36, I think it is today, the highest it has been since May, up 13% in the last week. You can talk about all the campaign signs that you want and all these things that are outside of homes, but that's what people see every day right now. Whatever you say about a more normal Republican candidate, that's something that Republicans are going to have to answer for, and certainly going to have to answer for it in Michigan.
And I will just say a little peek behind the curtain for our viewers here. In talking to our election unit today, in terms of how MS Now as a network views this Senate contest and the effort by Democrats and Republicans to try to retain control for the Republicans or seize control of the Senate for the Democrats, this Senate race for November in Michigan is viewed by MS Now, by our nonpartisan experts, as a toss-up race. If Haley Stevens wins tonight, or if Abdul El Sayed wins tonight, it will still tomorrow be a toss-up Senate race in the fall, according to our, again, nonpartisan expert prognosticators. And now that may change when we see how whoever the nominee is, what happens with the polling. We see how the campaigns shape up from Mr. Rogers, as you put it, and from the eventual Democratic nominee. But there's nothing intrinsic about this choice that connects definitely to the question of electability, absent the way the campaign unfolds from here on out. And so I think voters can try to game that out. And we know they have to try to stitch these two things together, but there's nothing magic about either one of these candidates that makes this an easier fight.
No. No, and I think that, look, I'm so glad we made the point about the polls because me and Michael Steele, we never, but I was like, what do you mean 15, 20? What are y'all drinking and eating and smoking over there in the poll situation? This was always going to be closer. And so I do think that there's been this advent as of late, recently in the last 2 cycles of these, less news organizations aren't doing as much polling anymore. Polling costs money. It is expensive. And so you've got some of these independent entities that start doing polling. And if they're not putting out their top lines, if they're not looking at, if we're not clear about who is behind, who's pushing the polling, it can look like what happened in that Texas race where all these polls said Jasmine Crockett was definitely they pushed her into the race, and come to find out after the fact through good reporting that those were Republican-backed polling entities that put the polls out there to encourage her to get into the race, to get the candidate that they wanted. And so I think, again, polls do not vote, people vote. So it's always important to talk to people on the ground, which is why I thought it was so amazing what you were doing out there. I watched all the stuff. I'm like, come on, focus group.
What's amazing to me is I used to be peppering you with questions back in the day.
Peter Alexander
and
set
now
a
we're side by
hard
side sitting on this big fancy set here in New York. It's a good gig.
Wonder Twin Powers, activate.